So, welcome to the Rhyme Magic Show. Today we have Cam Fraser on here. Cam, thanks so much for jumping on, man.
No worries, my brother. Thanks for having me. Thanks for using your platform to have a conversation like this.
Pleasure, dude. Now, obviously, you talk about something that society sees as a bit of a stigma, unfortunately, and I can tell that you've got such a courageous, powerful devotion to changing the way that society looks at sex, sexuality, a lot around masculinity, and male sexuality as well. I'm curious, man, to hear a little bit about your background, about how you got into this and what was the real personal pull to want to serve in this area, because I can feel that the desire to serve is so strong in all your posts and the content you put out.
Mm, yeah, man. I guess it all kind of started when I was probably in my late teens. I left Australia to go and study over in America. I got a sporting scholarship to go play, excuse me, collegiate athletics over there, and um, I guess I was when I was in high school, I was bullied because people thought I was gay. Like I got the real classic, "Oh, you're such a fag, you're so gay," like type of bullying, because my best friend had come out as gay at the time, and I was not your traditionally masculine, stereotypically alpha type of guy. I was interested in art and I was interested in philosophy and things like that. It's not a real sporty dude. But the transition then to go over to America kind of like gave me the opportunity to reinvent myself, and I was really wounded by the bullying that I had and the teasing of being like perceived to be gay, and so I almost like overcompensated, I suppose, and like really put myself out there and tried to have sex with as a lot of young women as possible, I suppose, to try and like I don't know, counter that narrative in my own mind or whatever it might be. And so I put myself in these really unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy situations where I was just, I was being sexual out of this fear response, out of this fear mentality of like, oh God, I've got to be sexual. Otherwise guys are going to think that I'm less of a man, or they're going to call me gay, or they're going to call me, unmanly or emasculated or whatever it is. And so that kind of mentality then started to make me feel like there was a lot of pressure on me to like perform my masculinity, perform my sexuality, and so like that pressure and that anxiety led to things like, as a young, in my early 20s as a young man, I was having premature ejaculation issues. I was having like erectile dysfunction issues. I was turning a lot to porn. I was drinking quite a lot as well. It was probably a period of 4 years where I was at college that every single sexual experience I was drunk for. Like I probably couldn't count how many on my hand experiences were sober. And so it was just like this really bad physical health, mental health space. I was also like playing collegiate sport, like the only sport I was good at, which is soccer. I was playing over there. And so I was part of like this locker room culture where it was quite misogynistic. Guys were just kind of like, performing masculinity for one another. Like how can you one up your mate in terms of how much of a man you are? And so that was all like, quality over quantity in terms of women, and, getting into fights and things like that, and how much you could drink. And it was just like this really, I'll use the word toxic space that I was in personally. And playing sport, I injured my back. I seriously injured my back. I fractured it. And as part of my rehabilitation, I had to go to clinical Pilates. I had to do this professional Pilates program. And through Pilates, I was introduced to a supplementary therapy, which was yoga. And through yoga and Pilates and meditation and things that come with it, I actually, for the first time in my life, kind of slowed down and listened to my body. Like I actually started noticing how I was feeling, in a physical sense, physical sensations, the tightness, the tension, the constriction that was in my body. And, we know that our somatic senses are really linked to our emotional feelings. And so like, as I started connecting to this contraction that I had in my body, there was times in yoga classes where I would just break down in tears halfway through a class because I'd been releasing this tightness and this tension, which was, shame and guilt and fear and stuff that just bubbled up for me that I'd kind of been trying to push down for so long. And so this practice, this somatic practice of yoga and Pilates, meditation, and body work, I suppose, was the gateway for me to then realize that I'd been holding on to all of this shame. You know, that's probably the biggest word that comes up for me when I think about those years is I was just ashamed. I was ashamed of my own sexuality. I was ashamed of the way I treated the young women I was being sexual with. I was ashamed of a lot of things. And so like this offered me an opportunity to like really not only mentally process it, but kind of physically process it as well.
How old were you?
I was probably in my, I left university when I was 21. So I was probably 19, 20 at the time.
That's a nice age to get into this deeper inner work. Wow.
Yeah. It was it was a hectic 4 years, like 17 to 20. And then, then 20 to 21 was that kind of last year that it all started turning around for me. And so like as part of that journey to kind of unlock and rediscover like who I was, I had this philosophy, I suppose, because I was studying psychology at the time and was really interested in, had kind of always been interested in sexuality and human behavior. And one of the universities that I went to was in the deep south of America. It was in Georgia, in a place called Mount Vernon, which is like right in the middle of the state of Georgia, the rural deep south. And the tagline of the school was unapologetically Baptist. So it was very conservative. It was Christian conservative, and and there was a lot of guilt and shame around sexuality there as well. And so I saw like how the lack of education and how like the overbearing religious guilt that is laid down across that community affected like these young kids and their sexuality and the way that they express themselves. So that was like a bit of a light bulb moment for me to be like, well, there's something here around sexuality that I think is going to be interesting to study. And of course I was interested in it myself because I was kind of going through some stuff and I was like, how can I overcome my own shit? And then I guess I pursued that, and that's kind of what all my papers were like in psychology, was all on sexuality and personality.
Wow.
But then I had this like kind of idea. I was like, you know what, I got to push myself to the extremes in terms of my mind, in terms of like what I can mentally experience. I wanted to push myself to the outer edges so that I can bounce back and bring experience back with me, so that I can relate to people from a bunch of different backgrounds and a bunch of different experiences. So,
and you were actually thinking this at this time, because it's a pretty wise, interesting thing to be considering at that age.
Because I knew I wanted to go into therapy. I knew I wanted to go into one-on-one work, and I was like, how am I going to connect with different clients if I'm just a regular dude who hasn't had any life experience? So I was like, I got to go and push myself out to all these experiences and then draw from them so I can relate to more people. And so I went to places like South America. I started journeying a lot with plant medicine. I went to Central America and again some plant medicine there, in North America, into Canada, and then over into Southeast Asia and India, and did like a big year-long trip around the world pretty much to a lot of places, and slowly made my way back to Perth, Western Australia, where I was like, what do I want to do? I really want to pursue sexuality. I'd kind of been introduced when I was traveling to Tantra and, classical Tantra, Neo-Tantra, sacred sexuality, things like that. I'd still been doing yoga. I'd done my yoga teaching degree, my teacher training. And I was like, I want to do something with this. And so I still wanted to have one foot in the somatic world, in like the yoga therapy space. But I also was really interested in the academic side of things as well, the human sexuality, the psychology, sexology, and things like that. So here in WA, I started... and I finished my postgraduate degree in sexuality and sexology, and I also started teaching tantric yoga. And so like I was, the way I framed it is like it was a sex ed class with a bit of yoga involved. Like it was more about sexuality than it was about the yoga, I suppose, because that was kind of my passion. But I didn't feel comfortable at the time like really claiming the title of sex coach. I was like, no, I'm just a yoga teacher. I'm just a yoga teacher. It was easier to explain that to people than it was to explain that I was a sex coach and a sexuality educator. So then we're
talking niche within niche here, because yoga for a lot of people in in mainstream would be hard to explain.
Yeah, totally.
And then sexuality and sex coaching and tantra would be even more deep. So.
Even layered down. Yeah, exactly, man. So crazy. It took a while for me to kind of get to that space. And then I was like, what do I want to, and then Hey, sorry about that, man. My phone turned itself on and off for some reason, so I'm back.
It's got charge.
Yeah, it's got charge. It's just oh man, technology. Don't get me
Yeah,
started.
it's no stress. We can clip it. It's fine. So you were about
Thanks,
to
dude. Thank
you
you.
were like hanging on. You just jumped in. You're like, that's where. And then you like froze, and I was like, what?
um, that's where I niched in men's sexuality because that's what I could speak on with authority because of that. That's my lived experience. So that's what the work that I do now is targeted towards. Is to myself 10 years ago, pretty much. I try and speak to a younger version of me. The stuff that I needed to hear when I was going through my sexuality concerns and sexuality issues and was grappling with my masculinity and sexuality. I needed a guy who was had 10 years on me, who'd been around the block, who knew what he was talking about, who could offer an alternative model of masculinity and sexuality that I could kind of look up to. But I didn't have. I had to figure that out for myself. So I try and speak to me 10 years ago, and because we all pretty much share a universal experience of masculinity. We're all affected by the same things. That seems to resonate with a lot of people because we all go through similar scenarios and similar contexts, regardless of where we are in the world. We kind of always seem to face the same challenges, and so I think that's why my work has kind of resonated with guys across the world.
Amazing, dude. That was a very well articulated story, by the way, and a really incredible story. How old are you now, Cam?
I've just turned 27.
Wow. So you just turned 27. You've been doing this for like 5 or so years, 5, 6, 7 years, pretty much.
Yeah. I've been working professionally for 5 years. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. And you spoke a lot about what it felt like to be confused around your masculinity and have your masculinity put on trial essentially and judged by people and copying the bullying. How do you now define masculinity yourself in a broader context, assuming that everyone's got their own flavors of it? How do you see masculinity, or how would you define it?
That's a great question, man. And the answer that I have is not as straightforward as maybe some people would like. So the idea, and you
Okay.
kind of touched on it, is like there's this broad spectrum of masculinities, right? Like I don't think masculinity is monolithic, which
Mm,
is why I kind of get a little bit I get a little bit frustrated with people that talk about like traditional masculinity or like toxic masculinity, and use kind of like these universal ways of speaking about something that is very, very nuanced and has a lot of
mm,
diversity to it and a lot of different aspects of it.
mm,
Like, the traditional masculinity thing irks me because it's like, well, whose traditions are we talking about? Which traditional masculinity are we talking about? Are we talking about like, the like sub-Saharan African, way of thinking about masculinity? Are we talking about, because they've got traditions and they've got traditional ideas of masculinity? Are we talking about Southeast Asian traditional masculinity? Are we talking about, contemporary American white, masculinity, which is often what people are referring to when they say traditional masculinity? There's kind of like this unspoken agreement that that's what they're referring to.
So
But
do you think?
there's
So do you think for you the kind of the pull, the trigger there, or like the subtle kind of frustration with it, is the fact that putting it into a category lends itself to easier judgment for people exploring different aspects of masculinity?
Totally, man. It creates rigidity, right? And it's like if you
Mm,
don't fit this mold of traditional masculinity, then you're not, like you're either in the group or you're out of the group, right? And that
yes.
creates divisiveness. And so and I guess my personal philosophy and the kind of the work that I do is I try and encourage guys to explore like alternative models of masculinity to find kind of what works for them. And this is why like I try and host workshops where there's guys who are like where there's gay guys and straight guys, and there's older men and there's younger men, and there's like a mixture of guys who express their masculinity in different ways, right? They're all masculine, they all feel like they're tapped into some sort of masculinity, but it shows up and it manifests in different ways for people. And I think exposure to that is really important because it allows you to then define what masculinity is subjectively for you, right? I don't think it's I mean, we can talk about objective masculinity as like maybe masculine energy and what that kind of looks like. But even there, I think the waters get a little bit murky when we start talking about like being penetrative and being, you know, holding space and, you know, being the container, and like the way that the like kind of Tantra world talks about masculinity and femininity. I think even that becomes like, it's a kind of like a set of rules, right? It's like, you know, if you're not this, then you're not being masculine. And it's like, well, fuck, who made those rules up, you know?
Yeah. I think all of these just tend to magnify insecurities that people hold, where they feel like they need to be something other than who they are to be worthy of love and worthy of receiving. And a lot of the work that I've done around masculinity is about giving yourself permission to be radically and authentically yourself with full love and in the messiness of that whole thing. Having said that, I have got a lot of value from reading some books on masculinity for myself, with the presupposition of this is an opportunity to explore different areas of myself and experiment as a bonus, as opposed to without this I'm a piece of crap and I'm not a full man. And I've done a lot of study of king, warrior, magician, lover, and the way that that masculine archetypal book was helpful for me is looking at different parts of myself that I haven't potentially explored. So for me, uh, the lover was lacking for many years there. I was disconnected from the part of me that felt a sense of connectedness and desired pleasure. And this word, this little quote that I really love in relation to that I found very relevant to the archetypes is whatever gets suppressed will be expressed unhealthily. So for me, not giving myself permission to experience pleasure as kind of a workaholic, entrepreneur, flavored human, I was then having passive aggressive short-term gratification, binge eating, looking at porn, needing sex, because I wasn't creating I wasn't regulating my sexuality and pleasure in a healthy, proactive way. And that's where getting into sexuality and creating a self-pleasure practice has been really healthy for me. I'd love to hear your take on how men can regulate their sexuality in a really healthy way, uh, themselves without another partner.
Yeah. I guess like the simplest way that I can frame this, to give like an example is when, and I've spoken to a lot of guys about the way that they masturbate, and you know, the common thread when it comes to the way that guys engage with their own sexuality by themselves is like from this mentality of trying to get something from their genitals, right? Or trying to get something from their masturbation. And oftentimes that's like, oh, I'm trying to get that ejaculation. I'm trying to get that gratification. I'm trying to get that, you know, dopamine squirt in my brain, whatever it is, trying to get to that end goal and trying to achieve something from their masturbation, which ties into this idea of being like a productive member of society, being goal oriented, having to produce and having to achieve. So that like the reframe that I give to guys is like, instead of trying to take from your genitals, instead of trying to take from your cock, like the ejaculation and the orgasm, think of it as giving to your genitals. How about you're giving pleasure to your body? Why don't you try allowing your body to receive the sensation of pleasure, allow it to fill up with pleasure, allow it to be nourished and to be nurtured by the pleasure that it's capable of receiving, right? So instead of trying to take something from it, try and give something to your cock, try and give something to your genitals, and try and allow it to be filled up with that. So that's like the simplest way I can kind of help guys reframe the way that they experience their own sexuality by themselves, is like, stop trying to take and start giving.
Such a massive reframe because so like I myself going through a journey of doing a lot of healing and remove like working with shame around sexuality with the tantra teacher, a big thing that was just a mind blowing for me. And it's interesting how much of a blind spot what it was, that my lingam or my penis is something that can be celebrated, and it's not a taking bad thing. Like it's so interesting because I wouldn't have thought before engaging in this healing journey that I looked at my penis as such a negative thing. But if a dude, obviously it's not appropriate in this society based on everyone's perspective of it. But if a dude just got his cock out, and it'd just be like, that is the most disgusting, just revolting thing ever. And so it's just society's view of a cock is just like taking, destructive, rapey, uh, out to get something. And the way that my tantra teacher talks about not just a lingam but also a yoni or a vagina is like they're beautiful things that deserve recognition and love. And I just never would have put love and nurture in the same thinking or category in any way possible with my dick. It's just like that's the thing that I use to try to get things that people judge me for. And I just couldn't believe how much shame. And then the opposite, experiencing the polarity of someone giving me permission to nurture and appreciate this part of myself was just it just dropped so many layers of pent up shame and guilt and frustration and self-hatred. It was just like could not believe how light and loved and unconditionally held I felt in a container where that was not judged but it was celebrated. So, but I just because I'm someone that's into personal development, I can't believe how I was a blind spot for me. I didn't even realize how much shame had been cast upon it. And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and guys are like, man, I appreciate you sharing that, man, because it's reminded me of like this idea that guys are ashamed of their sexuality. Like men are on the most part, like they feel shame about being turned on. Like it's if we're walking down the street, right, and we see someone who is attractive and we find arousing, fuck, if we get an erection in public, it's like the worst thing ever, right? Like it not only is that reinforced by society's kind of like, oh, how dare you have a fucking erection on the bus, or how dare you have an erection in class, or whatever it is. But we internalize that as guys as well, and we're like, fuck, I'm ashamed of being turned on right now in this public setting, and that extends to even more intimate and private settings as well. Like guys feel creepy when they're being turned on, and so because we have this like lack of ownership of our own sexuality, like we're really, really good as men at projecting our desires onto things rather than kind of owning what those feelings are inside of us, and we're really good at consuming pleasure rather than generating pleasure from within us. So we oftentimes like because we project our pleasure onto our partners, for example, it's like our partner's responsibility to make us feel turned on. It's our partner's responsibility to make us get an erection, right? It doesn't come from us. It comes from them. We kind of put all our eggs in their basket. And so, but like then if, for example, we don't get an erection or we don't get turned on, it's like also our partner's fault as well, right? They're not hot enough, or they're not whatever enough, and so like the easiest way I can explain this to guys is like if you've ever had if you've ever drank too much and you couldn't like get an erection, or you couldn't come, or whatever it is when you're with a partner, like think of the stories that kind of popped up then as like because that erection has been taken away, right? Because erection is synonymous in our society with a guy being aroused, even though we can be aroused and not have an erection, and also have an erection but not be aroused, right? There is some non-concordance there. But if there's been an opportunity, or if you've experienced in your life this lack of erection or lack of ejaculation, the stories that pop up there is like, oh fuck, firstly it's like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I working properly? Am I broken? But then the secondary story is like, actually, what's wrong with her? She's not hot enough. She's not doing that thing that I like. She doesn't look like this person that I've seen in porn. And women have similar stories as well. I'm using a heterosexual example here, but women also have those stories of like, oh, what's wrong with me? Am I not hot enough? Am I not turning him on enough? Is he not enjoying this, right? Because he doesn't have an erection, or he can't come. So they have all this self-worth stuff comes up for her. And then the secondary story is like, well, actually, what's wrong with him? Is he fucking weird? Is he a creep? Like, is he into something that we're not doing? That's, a fetish or a kink, or what's his problem, right? And so we kind of like blame ourselves and blame one another. And because no one's talking about it, we're not encouraged to talk about these things, especially as guys. We don't talk about our feelings, right? And sexual desire is a feeling. we're conditioned to kind of, push it down and not think about it, and just like, and just forget about it pretty much. That whole stigmatization of those feelings really hinders the conversations we can have. And so because no one's talking about it, these things kind of spiral, and that's how relationships become really unhealthy, is because no one's having a conversation about that.
Man, there's so many things in that. So many things in that. Because, so at the end of the day, like, because we're ashamed of our own sexuality, we 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 outsource responsibility for it because we don't know how to regulate it ourselves and create pleasure ourselves. But ultimately, if we did take responsibility and realize that pleasure is something that we can create, magnify, and build up ourselves, it takes the pressure off the other person in a sexual experience, and then allows both parties to relax more, and there to be less expectation on outcomes, and so the experience can be more fulfilling. Is
Mm.
that is that like the benefit?
Totally, man. Like, there's a reason why, again, in a heteronormative context, like, there's a reason why women fake orgasms, right? It's because, you know, us as men, we outsource our pleasure to what our partner looks like and what they're doing, and how much pleasure she's having is how much pleasure we have, right? We don't, or no one's teaching us that, you know, we can experience these heightened states of pleasure. We're just kind of limited to this 5-second sticky white crotch sneeze and a little bit of stimulation here. Um, but
One way to frame it. I've never heard it spoken about like that before.
but you know, but women can have these like intense, multi-orgasmic, transcendental, cosmic orgasms, and so like as guys, we go, oh well, the more pleasure that she's experiencing, then you know, that's how. And also, it's like a bit of a marker of like your masculinity as well, like, you know, how many times did you make her come, like how loud was she, all these kind of like, you know, ways of thinking about sex is all, again, really performative. And so we magnify that pressure on our partner to, you know, to be, you know, really loud, or to like, you know, or to you know, experience a lot of pleasure. And oftentimes we don't know what the fuck we're doing in bed, so she's actually not experiencing a lot of pleasure. But to save our ego and to, you know, make sure that, you know, the sex is, you know, pleasurable for us, you know, a lot of women are faking that experience of pleasure because it plays into that dynamic that we've set up with not owning our own sexuality, with not having communication about it, with not really knowing what we're doing and having a lack of education.
It's so crazy, isn't it? Because it's like the thing that people, it's like the most pleasurable experience that we can have on the planet, and it's the least communicated topic on the planet at the same time. That is it. Just thinking about that for a second is such a crazy. Most people don't bring light to that or bring attention to that. Just like wait, like hangs around in the background. What do you? Because I've experienced a lot of transformation in my sexuality since engaging in tantra, and the more that I'm learning, the more that I'm realizing that this is quite a black hole, like that you can go super deep into it, and there's lots of things that I don't know. But compared to what I didn't know that I didn't know before even setting on the journey, I'm just like, how is the whole world, most of the world, engaging in sex in such a linear, small container of experience and possibility? It's crazy. What's
Mm.
your hope for people to experience? Like, if you could just wave a wand and just go poof, what would you hope for people to be able to experience individually with their own sexuality, and then in their sexual experiences with others?
Well, my hope is for people to be a lot more open and a lot more curious and a lot more non-linear. I love that word that you use, linear,
Mm,
and not, well, non-linear in their sexual experiences. You know, to stop having caveman sex, right? Like, a lot of people are having sex to survive, right? They're having sex to procreate, you know, and it's not because they want to have kids, but the way that they're having sex is, you know, from this place of heightened tension, from this place of, you know, the sympathetic nervous system. It's focused on ejaculation, right? It's not really focusing on female orgasms, for example, and it's, you know, it's really good for, you know, that type of sex is really, really good for reproduction and for the survival of our species, right? It's caveman sex.
and
Um,
stress release,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
In the
totally, man.
in the short term.
Yep, yep. And the um, and I guess like the vision that I have for people is like shifting away from caveman sex, away from sex for procreation, whether they are aware of it or not, and sex for pleasure, sex for actually, a friend of mine calls it transcendental sex. So transcending that like base survival, way of having a sexual experience, and like, where can we take this? What can we do with this sexual experience? What else can we, what else can we experience in this experience? A lot of people like don't want to think about bringing any other emotions into sex. It's like only pleasure and that's it. But man, you can use sex and self-pleasure to like move anger through your body, to move shame and guilt through your body. Like pleasure is a healing modality, and being able to like use it in a really intentional way can help you overcome trauma, can help you overcome like all these, any guilt that you might have and any shame. It's a beautiful thing, and learning how to shift from caveman to transcendental sex is what I hope for the future.
Yeah, amazing, dude. Thanks for sharing that. And you'd also be cool with people bringing in more primitive energy to a sexual experience, right? It's just that being the intention, or the non, like the ignorant intention, without people even being aware of it, to then actually having awareness over the scope of possibility in sex. Can you give more examples of what sex can be used for? Like just random examples. I'm happy to reel some off as well, because I just think from the interview here, and someone that's new to embracing a wider range of sexual experiences, I didn't know what was possible beforehand. So it was very difficult to be able to take in what someone was saying without experiencing it, without the examples being given, because it's just like discussing, hey, it's just kind of like saying, hey, that you can do like a million other things with this pen than write with it. And people are thinking, oh yeah, what? What?
Yeah,
Like, I don't
just
know.
leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, yeah, what else could people do with it?
Well, you offered a great example before, man, which is like, intentionally bringing in that primal wild man or wild woman energy into sex, right? And really allowing yourself to explore that, because that's one of the things that we're really hindered in our ability to do. Like we live in a modern kind of world. We don't have a lot of opportunity to quote unquote rewild and to connect back to that kind of really primitive part of ourselves. And sex is one of the most quote unquote primitive things that we can do, right? It's like I said, it's oftentimes used in a survival way. A lot of people don't know that having sex like that. So you can like really intentionally bring that energy in to allow yourself to tap into that part of yourself that we don't really have an opportunity to tap into.
And then that lends itself to, because that's one of my, this is going to be funny, but it's true. The whole reason I moved into this apartment was so that I could tap into that energy in self-pleasure. Because
Nice.
I moved from being in a group share house, and I broke up with my ex, and instead of moving into or staying at the same place and my ex moving out and then having a couple of housemates, I was like, no, I want to work on my sexuality in an environment that I know it'll be supported, which is by myself. And so I could let loose, so that I could remove any limits on my self-expression. So for me, it was a metaphor for my expression in life. It's like if I couldn't even fully express myself with noise, sound, like noise, movement, the way that I move, the movement of my body, energy, and just like unleashing essentially, then I'm just kind of like metaphorically always holding on to tension in my life. It's like, no, I want to let free. I want to let the wild man out and just scream and shout and just be authentic for those parts that hadn't had the opportunity to express, so they didn't get expressed unhealthily with passive aggression or self-inflicted pressure. I just wanted to let loose. That was one thing.
Yeah, and there's a Zen proverb, man, which is like the way that you do one thing is the way you do all things, And I'm a big believer that applies directly to sex and pleasure and sexuality. Like if the way that you self-pleasure or the way that you have sex is like from this place of anxiety, is from this place of constriction and from inauthenticity and from tension, then man, that's the way you're going to be experiencing other pleasures in your life as well, right? Pleasure isn't just sex and masturbation. There's the pleasure of food, for example. There's the pleasure of a conversation. There's a pleasure of flirting. There's a pleasure of going for a walk through the woods and connecting to nature. There's a pleasure of like diving deep into the ocean. Like all these things are pleasurable experiences if that's your preference. But if you're limiting the pleasure that you experience in one of those areas, then you're going to be limiting the experience of pleasure that you can have in other areas as well. So being able to open yourself up like the beautiful example that you've just given of, you know, allowing yourself to express verbally and through sound and through noise and through movement and through touch as well, you know, and through music as well, having some, you know, that's a really beautiful way of like really tapping into energy is through some like primal music. You allow yourself to kind of go to that place in yourself, which you can then do when you're doing these other experiences as well, right? Which you can then do when you're going and eating some food, or when you're
Yeah.
going for a walk through the
You
woods or
just
whatever.
grab your hamburger and just throw it on the ground
And
and start
smash
screaming.
it. Exactly, man. Yeah, you give yourself the opportunity to actually tap into that in other areas of your life. And I guess the other end of the example, or the other extreme, I suppose, is sex can be used as a way, like I said, to heal trauma. And the way that I explain this is like, and there's people doing this work as well. So this isn't like just a conceptual thing. There's people, you know, legit doing this work and offering this beautiful healing modality. Right? Yeah. So they're, so an example that was given to me by someone that does this work is, he's a male sex worker, he's a male sex therapist, and he works with women. So he's heterosexual and he works with women. So women pay him to be sexual with them. And some of that work is to help women who have gone through sexual trauma overcome that trauma. And the way that he does that with them is through role playing or reenactment. So the woman will kind of debrief with him and explain like, hey, here's the trauma that I went through and where it comes from, and here's the scenario that kind of happened. It was an abusive whatever, or it was, you know, some sort of assault or whatever it might be for them. And so he goes, okay, we're going to, you know, and they've obviously had this agreement and consent to do this. It's like, okay, we're going to reenact that and allow you to take your power back, right? So where you couldn't say no before, or where you didn't have control before, we're going to go through that process again. And obviously, you know, I'm going to be the person who is the assaulter or the violator or whatever it is, but at all times, you're going to be in control. So when it gets to the point where you want to say no, and I'll help you bring that no out, and I'll help you bring those boundaries out, and I'll help you bring those that strength and that courage and that power out in your sexuality. And so like that reenactment, that role playing allows that woman particularly to step into ownership of her sexuality again, right? She takes control back of her sexual experiences, and she can like process it on a somatic sexual level as well as that mental and emotional level as well. So so it's another example of how sex can be a really powerful tool, and sex is not, you know, just intercourse, right? It's not just penile vaginal penetration. Sex is that whole scenario, right? Everything that you've done, that talk, that agreement, the touch, the conversations, the other types of sexual acts that you're doing, all of that is sex, right? But we tend to limit sex to just like penetration, which it doesn't necessarily have to be. So that's another example.
One thing I want to mention there, because it's quite a different sort of therapy that a lot of people wouldn't have heard of before, or and it instantly, because people don't know how to regulate their own sexuality, they can only form an opinion about what that would be based on the way that they view sex. And the way that most people view sex as this model, I'm sure you're aware of it, the wheel of consent. The wheel of consent. So wheel of consent for the listeners is this model that explains the different dynamics that you can play in any experience, not just sexual, but it's used often for sex therapists. And it essentially says there's two main dynamics. There's the giver-receiver dynamic, where the person that's doing the action is giving for the purpose of the other person receiving. And that can be healthy within the wheel of consent, but each of the roles can be played unhealthily as well. So the giver can be playing like more of an over giver or a pleaser kind of role, which is an unhealthy giver, because they don't even realize that they're overdoing it outside their own consent. They don't have boundaries. And then the receiver can be over receiving, and they can be more of like the princess role or the entitled person. But then there's the taker and the allower or the enabler. And the taker is someone that is doing the action. So you could be like giving oral sex to your partner. You're the one that's doing the action, but you're actually taking, because the way that you're doing it is for your own pleasure, not for the purpose of the other person. So it's not giving because you're responding to their cues and you're attempting to mainly make this experience for them. You're actually doing the oral so that you can get off on it. And so when therapists understand this model and they step into a dynamic where they can serve someone, they purely play in the giver role and they don't go to the taker, and they're aware of it. And so if their energy, because it's natural, like if there was a male that was facilitating a reenactment of a trauma through sex, was to then step in and just or actually got aroused by seeing this person naked in some a female naked, which would be completely healthy and normal. Instead of entertaining and magnifying that and playing into that and taking from it, he'd go, oh, cool. I'm aroused by that. Sweet. Back to the giver role. And there's like a healthy boundary there. And a lot of people don't understand that. And a lot of people don't understand that for their own sexual experience in relationships, right? Where they mainly do sex from either a place of trying to overtake or from the place of unhealthy giving. So they're either like an overtaker where they're doing it, which is called outside the wheel of consent, called the abuser, or they're from like an overgiving, which is just like when the men, often men will try to like overgive because, and I'm just projecting my experiences here because I'm trying to like be the results orientated person that's doing such a good job in the bedroom that I'm just like giving. And there's an unhealthy understanding of, hey, you want to try to play in that full spectrum of you take, sometimes it's healthy as long as it's within consent, give, receive, allow, it's all sweet. If there's communication, I think it's probably a solid segue into communication, right? It's probably one of the most important things around sex.
Totally, man. Like so I've done some work with Betty Martin, who came up with the Wheel of Consent. I've done a 5-day immersion with her.
What?
She's amazing. So if people want to, just as a sidebar, if people want to learn more about the Wheel of Consent, Betty Martin is the person to go to. And she has got a bunch of free resources online.
Does she have like a video? Because if someone just like, I would highly recommend, because for me, that changed the game for me, understanding how sex can be healthier. Because when you're aware of other people's boundaries and the different roles you can play, you're not accidentally or unconsciously playing into a dynamic that doesn't feel right for you or doesn't feel right for them. Gives you a way to give yourself permission to play all the different assortment of different roles in a healthy way, and then not judging yourself for weird energy, because you can make the energy consensual and not weird by understanding the wheel of consent. Totally. So go check out the Wheel of Consent, guys.
Yeah, she's got a 45-minute free video that you can watch that fully breaks it down, which is amazing.
So good.
But there's the key to that, like the key that unlocks that whole wheel, is one simple question, which is, who is this for? Right? So if you're being sexual with one another, and like you offered the example of a blowjob, right? If you're if you're giving the blowjob, asking you and your partner, okay, who is this for? Who is this blowjob for? Is this blowjob for me, the person that's giving the blowjob, because I'm really enjoying it and getting a lot of pleasure out of it? Or is it for you because you're the person that's really enjoying it and getting a lot of pleasure out of it? Like, who is this for? Who is this action for? Who's getting the most out of this is like the key to kind of like start thinking about those 4 quadrants of that wheel. And that taking quadrant is a massive part of like men's sexuality, right? It's like owning that taking quadrant, which is, I suppose, like the example that I often use is my own fiance. Is like, I really enjoy giving like a sensual massage with like warm oil and with candles and with incense and stuff, because I love the feel of a woman's body. I love the feel of my fiance's body, and it's very, very arousing and very exciting and pleasurable for me to do that, to be the person that's massaging. Probably more so than she enjoys getting the massage, right? She, for the most part, allows me to give her a massage, because she, even though she enjoys it, she's like, I know you really enjoy it. So like me having integrity with that taking, like owning that, and like, hey, I really enjoy giving you a massage. It turns me on so much. Can I give you a massage? You know, and asking that question, which is how you create that consent, is can I give you a massage? Can I do this to you? Can I, whatever it is. And that gives the opportunity for your partner or the person that you're engaging with to be like, yes, cool. That's an agreement. You've got consent.
And then you can fully own it.
Yes, totally. Yep. Or to voice a boundary, right? To create a different agreement, which is like, yes, but only for 15 minutes because I don't have time, or yes, but not this type of touch because I don't like that type of touch, or even a full no, or it could be a no, I don't have time now, how about later tonight, or a no, I don't want a massage from you ever, and so it allows for boundaries to be put into
Imagine
place,
if
right?
your fiance just whips that out of nowhere.
Fuck, I'd be like, well, but that taking piece,
Never.
the taking, the gold in that, what Betty kind of calls the magic in that taking is integrity, right? Having integrity with your taking. So, because if you start taking, if I, that same example, if I just said, hey, would you like a massage, right? So again, that instead of saying, can I give you a massage, right? Which is me owning it. A lot of people say, would you like this, right? So they're projecting the ownership of that onto the other person. It's like, and so a lot of people, they're saying, would you like me to go down on you? Right? They might actually be the person that wants to go down on their partner, but they're asking, would you like it? Is it something that you want? Right? So they don't have to own that they're the person that's getting something from it.
Because they're ashamed of their, like they don't give
Totally.
themselves permission to receive, right?
Yeah, which goes back to what we were talking about before with masculinity and shame being connected in terms of sexuality. So having the integrity with regards to your taking and being like, cool, I'm owning this taking. I'm aware of the fact that this is for me, and then not, like you said, not overtaking as well. So not getting to the point where you're doing something that you hadn't agreed on, but you've just kind of slipped into that overtaking role. So integrity is that key piece.
Wow, it's so powerful because someone might be thinking, well, if I'm asking all the time, what if they say no? Or if you didn't ask and you did it and they said, and like this, and then without saying anything, they didn't say no. So it's a unconscious yes, but there is an integrity there, then there's going to be some kind of weird energy, and it's going to cause an invisible energetic wall or block to start to form in between you and them and your sexual exploration. And because then they're left going, well, I didn't really want to do it, but I did it. Now my association to our sex life is slightly less open and free and liberated. Now I feel it a bit more contracted. Whereas if people are doing things within their integrity, then everyone's always feeling clean and open and healthy and vibrant. And I only learnt boundaries a year ago properly. I'd heard the term, but I didn't understand it, not just in sex, but in my whole life. And it's such a game changer, because we often in society champion people that are yes people. It's like, this person's so willing to do it, but then out of nowhere they just blow up because they've been saying yes all the time, and out of nowhere, or like an employee is just like yes, 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 and out of nowhere they just quit because they've just been saying yes, and then they've burnt themselves out, and they're just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm always doing this. But they created that without, because they didn't say no, and it's worse for both parties involved, even if it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah, 100%, man. And like, to go back to what we were sharing about, like that heterosexual example of women faking orgasms, like a lot of women tolerate touch from their partners because their partners aren't fully like communicating about what it is that they want and what it is that they want to do. They're just kind of going through the motions. A lot of guys have like a move, right? They're like, oh, if I do this particular thing, I know she's going to squirt, or I know she's going to, orgasm, or, I watched this video online. I read this article about this particular technique or whatever it is. And it's like, that's my move now. And I know this is what I'm going to go to.
She's like poker on the left nipple. Just like,
yeah, yeah. And we tend to frame, because this is just what we do in society, all women as the same, right? Like all anatomy is the same and every woman wants the same thing. There's no diversity in porn, for example. So there's like this assumption that's like, okay, this one move is going to work on every single partner that I have. So a lot of, and because there's no conversation, like I said, no one's really talking about it. No one's owning who this is for. A lot of women put up with a lot of the touch that they get from guys, and pretend that it's, or fake that pleasure, that experience of orgasm, because they're just kind of like, well, okay, this is what he's doing. And that feeds into this idea that like guys are supposed to know what they're doing in bed. They're supposed to be the knowledgeable ones. They're supposed to be the active participant, people that pursue and initiate sex, which is, but that then frames women as like the passive receivers who like don't have any autonomy, and they just kind of like, get sex done to them. And it creates this like really unhealthy dynamic.
I would love for you, man, to talk about what it's like with your sex life in a healthy, knowledgeable, aware, consenting, like what can it be like? Because I've come out of my last relationship and then gone And I'd started learning about sexuality and tantra before that ended, but it was never got into a regular rhythm of a healthy sex life. What can it actually be like when you've got two communicating adults engaging in a sexual uh, yeah, relationship?
Um, the word that comes to mind is play, right?
Mm,
It becomes play. It becomes like this: two people communicating about what it is that turns them on, what it is that turns them off, what they do want to do, what they don't want to do, which is always fluctuating, right? It's always dynamic and fluid, and so you, because not every sexual encounter is that rigid wheel of consent model, right? Where one person's in one quadrant and one person's in the other. It's always moving, right? And this is where this
mm,
idea of play comes in. Is like once you've got that communication down and you're able to talk with one another, you're able to actually talk in the moment. Hey, I'm really enjoying this, or well, actually, I actually don't really enjoy that type of touch or that type of position, right? And you don't get your ego in the way. If my partner says to me, hey, what you're doing there, I actually don't really enjoy, I don't go, oh, fuck, now I failed as a man and like, oh, I couldn't pleasure my partner and she's going to be disappointed with me and we're going to break up. And I don't, go into that headspace, which a lot of men go into, right? If their
mm.
one move doesn't work, then they feel like, fuck, now what am I supposed to do? And
Because they don't
there's
have other
resentment.
resources, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's no
Communication.
flexibility there. There's no
Mm,
like, oh, no worries. Like, hey, let's try this instead. Oh, what about if we come over this? Like, there's no opportunity to share or to communicate because they feel shut down. So like playfulness and that play and that moving of like taking and giving and receiving and doing to and being done to is like, um, so, and I guess like the the way that can be facilitated is by taking the goal out of sex. Like a lot of guys and a lot of people in general, I won't just generalize to guys here, but a lot of people, like, sex has to look a certain way for it to be quote unquote successful, right? Sex
mm.
has to involve penetration, it has to involve an erection, it has to involve an ejaculation, it has to involve an orgasm. And if it doesn't have those things, then it doesn't quote unquote count as sex, right?
Mm.
So because that's the mentality that we have when we go into a sexual experience, we either overtly or subconsciously try and push for those things to happen, right? Like we
Yeah.
become fixated and goal oriented with regards to those things, which creates pressure and anxiety and expectation and judgment, which is not healthy or conducive for a good sexual experience. So taking those things away, like my fiance and I, the way that we started kind of exploring this is like intentionally taking those things away. So like we're in full ownership and control of that experience. Like, hey, let's experiment with not ejaculating, right? Let's experiment with actually having sex without having an orgasm. What does that feel like? Let's have sex without any penetration at all, right? What does that feel like? If there's maybe a time where I was really tired and but still wanted to be sexual and connect, and I really couldn't maintain or get an erection. It's like, hey, what does sex look like now? Let's intentionally use this time to explore how we can be sexual with one another, even though there's no erection involved, for example. And so intentionally
What could that
exploring
look
these
like?
things. Well, like we said, sex doesn't have to look like penetration. So we
Mm.
can, we can think of, oral sex, for example. We can think of digital sex using fingers. Like sex can be eye gazing, for example, like, being
Mm.
nude and eye gazing. It doesn't even have to be nude. Like energetic sex is a thing. So just
Yeah.
exploring other ways of sharing sexual energy with your partner.
Mm.
That could be holding hands and doing a sexy massage, or it could be, there's Betty Martin's got a beautiful game called the 3 minute game, which is just like touching your partner for 3 minutes the way that they want to be touched, and then touching your partner again for another 3 minutes the way that you want to touch them, and then just kind of reversing roles. And so all these things can be sexually intimate and can be sexual experiences that fulfill your sexual needs when you start to realize that you don't just have one avenue for fulfilling sexual needs. Your needs can be fulfilled all these other ways as well. And once you kind of open yourself up to that and then communicate about it, you can step into that playfulness mindset, which is
Yeah.
probably the way that I can describe it as much as possible.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks for sharing personally
That's right, man. No worries.
your experience with that. The word intimacy is coming up massively. It's such a top priority for me in a relationship to have this really safe, trusting, close bond. And I personally, especially based on the contrast of how society functions and how people operate outside the bedroom, outside the house, I feel as though having a open, trusting communicated, playful sex life would create such a feeling of intimacy, especially if it's not just penetrative, but there's eye gazing and these deep, open, playful, vast, different experiences that then moving together through the world. There's this just knowing of, hey, we have this beautiful, deep, trusting relationship in the most intimate setting, which is not always penetrative, but it's intimate. It just, I know from being in relationships where that trust hasn't been there, from like I haven't created a trusting bond, and they also haven't created a trusting bond, and together there wasn't that deep trust. Talk to me about how you've seen with the clients you've worked with and with yourself, like before and after, in terms of trust in a relationship off the back end of sorting through sexual shame and getting to a healthy sex life.
Yeah, man, this is a beautiful conversation to get into, because it changes your relationship. Like, there's a statistic that I like to share here, which is a sex therapy statistic, which is that when you're in a good, strong, healthy relationship, the sex and the sex that you're having with your partner contributes to about 20% of that relationship. But if you're in a unhealthy kind of untrusting relationship, the kind of, the container's not there and you don't really feel intimate and the relationship's kind of breaking down, then the sex plays a disproportionately more powerful role in the breakdown of that relationship. It becomes 70% of that relationship. So what this kind of means is that, like, when we're enjoying our partner in a non-sexual way, right, when there's that intimacy, there's that trust, and there's these other really strong components, I think of, like, there's this passion and there's this commitment, and then these other really beautiful ways of relating to another person, the sex doesn't play a huge role, right? It plays a role still. 20% is still, a fifth of that relationship, but it's part of a larger kind of picture, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But when we maybe don't really have that strength of a relationship, when we kind of feel like there's not a lot of trust there, when there's not a lot of like non-sexual intimacy, when there's not a lot of conversation or passion or whatever else is there, then we try to, and couples may relate to this, is we try and like make the sex the important part. It becomes like this big, huge 70% role of the relationship, where if the sex is really good, you might stick around. But if that sex is shit, then the relationship's going to break down pretty quickly. So sex plays this huge role in a really unhealthy relationship, and it's kind of this like looming kind of figure. So
that's so interesting, because
and it speaks to like this idea that we need to and because no one's really talking about the sex that they're having, right? It speaks to this idea that, like, okay, we need to be communicating specifically about sex, right? Especially if like you're struggling to connect with each other outside of the bedroom, starting to connect with each other inside of the bedroom and building that sexual intimacy, which is a massive role of the relationship, can then start to help build trust outside of the bedroom as well, and intimacy outside the bedroom, and vice versa. That's a bit of a two-way street. But exploring sexual intimacy and non-sexual intimacy is paramount to like a really healthy relationship, and like that's different for different people. You know what I mean? Like, some people are really interested in like physical affection, right? That's like the way that they experience intimacy. And I kind of think of like the love languages here, like the way that they experience love and the way that they feel loved is when their partner is like all over them, lots of hugs, lots of kisses, lots of touching, lots of, closeness, time together. But that might not be what the other partner wants to do, right? Or how they experience love. So like there's a conversation there about, okay, well, what do you need from me in order to feel appreciated and loved in this relationship, right? In order to feel connected to me, what do you need? And it's like, and here's another conversation around boundaries, right? You, as a person, once your partner says, I need you to touch me all the time, can you, as the person that's being asked to touch all the time, can you agree to that, right? Can you consent to that? Is that something you can actually do, right? Or do you have to set up a boundary? You can be like, okay, I can do that, but here's my limit, right? Here's my boundary. Here's where I can go up to. And vice versa, that then opens the opportunity for you to say, well, here's what I need to feel loved. I need space. I need time. I actually need to be by myself to feel recharged, because I feel a little bit drained, being in the container so often. It's like, can you allow me to do that? Can I have some time to myself? And the partner might go, oh, fuck, that hurts, because that's, I want to be with you all the time, but I respect and understand that that's kind of what you need to feel that you're in a strong relationship. So yes, I can do that, but can we do Saturday nights together, or but I need to see you at least once a day, or whatever it might be, right? And so opens an opportunity to have that wheel of consent, but in a non-sexual framework as well, right? Like that wheel of consent can be applied to pretty much everything.
Yeah, and that sounds like a tricky thing to get right. To get those, what Alison Armstrong calls them, deals. The conversation around boundaries and how to make each other's needs work is a complex, difficult thing to get right that takes work and time. But the alternative is just not communicating about it, getting frustrated at your partner for what he or she doesn't understand that you desire, and then just constant arguing or passive aggressiveness and distance. Is the alternative is where the problem can become more obvious.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that like I see holding people back from stepping into those conversations, which are really difficult, which are hard, which are risky, right, where you have to be vulnerable, is fear. Is this fear of like, it could be the fear of rejection, it could be the fear of judgment, it could be the fear of fucking up. But one of the biggest fears that I see is like the fear of being like fully seen, the fear of like being yourself, the fear of like having someone like really know you, like the depths of yourself. And like one of my favorite musicians is Jim Morrison, and he had this beautiful quote, which is like, the greatest fear that we have is the fear of the freedom to be ourselves. And so I kind of apply that to what we've been talking about, which is, once you start having these conversations and being vulnerable and opening up and saying, hey, this is what I need, these are my desires, this is what turns me on, right? This is what turns me off, this is what I don't like, this is what you do that upsets me, right? You're showing yourself, you're kind of cracking yourself open, being like, here's me, here's my full expression, authenticity, genuineness, integrity, like kind of take it or leave it almost, right? And it's a fucking scary thing to do, because we don't know how our partner's going to react to that. We don't know whether they're going to leave us. We don't know whether they're going to abandon us. We don't know whether they're going to, tell our friends, who knows where that's going to get taken. And so like that freedom to, and this is where like we talk about quote unquote masculine energy here, right? And that masculine pole, David Data talks about this, is like, the masculine is looking for freedom, and in that undeveloped or immature way, that freedom kind of looks like non-commitment, right? It's that non-committal freedom where it's like, cool, I've got the freedom to fucking go over here, and now I can go over here, and now I can do this, and I can sleep with this person. Very often that's the way freedom is framed, in that kind of like adolescent way of thinking about it. But the freedom in that kind of matured or developed or in that kind of higher degree is like the freedom to be fully like to be fully seen, to be fully open, to be the freedom to kind of be yourself, right? To not have to hide anything, to not have to worry about what your partner's going to think, because you're fucking, you've got this honesty and integrity that's comes from that place of fullness and that place of wholeness. So and that's kind of where I tie all that into like masculinity and the way that guys are showing up with their partners, both in and out of the bedroom. It's like, can you just be your fucking self? Stop performing, stop projecting. What is coming up for you? What are you aware of in your body? Can you express that? Can you talk about it? And can you transcend that, like, immature adolescent, the Jungian archetypes, right? The boy archetypes, and can you actually be a quote unquote man in these scenarios, right?
Wow, dude, that's super cool. That is super cool. And what has your experience been with clients that you've worked with, or people that you've seen who have gone from suppressing their desires and their truthful, authentic expression to then allowing it to come out and communicating it? What have you seen in terms of the way that it's impacted relationships and the way that it's impacted the actual person who is starting to be more authentic in the way that they show up?
Yeah, thank you for following up with that question, because I realized I never answered it for you before.
That's okay.
Well, I see like couples particularly, and I just had a couple reach out to me the other day about doing the work with me. It changes the trajectory of the relationship, right? Like it changes your life. You know, it changes the way that you relate to your partner, but also changes the way that you relate to yourself and all the other people in your life, all the other people that you interact with, and you know, because you're starting to open up and you're getting these skills of communication, you're able to be authentic, is it allows you to, instead of going down this kind of one path, which is where a lot of people kind of see themselves going down, it's like fuck a sexless marriage and, you know, just resentment and divorce or whatever it might be. It's like, okay, you've got this whole spectrum now of experiences that you can go down, and there's like, you lean into your curiosity. You can always be more curious. You can always learn more. So I see like those shackles come off of these men and these couples that I work with, and they just like feel lighter and more able to express and more able to explore. And I've had guys that, you know, were like, oh fuck, I've always kind of, you know, I've watched it on porn and I've never really had the courage to go out and do, you know, this particular sexual thing. But now I've like had the courage to speak to my partner about it, and we're exploring it, and she loves it, and it's like amazing. And so like just the freedom to be able to do that and to be able to connect more intimately with your partner, it strengthens that relationship. You know, I'm a big believer in like, if you work on your sexuality and you kind of like fully own it and you express it and you talk about it and you communicate with it, your relationship will be better. And if your relationship gets better, then, you know, the community that you're in is built up of strong relationships, right? If you've got a community full of shitty relationships, not a very strong community. If it's a community full of like really healthy, vibrant, intimate relationships, strong community, right? Strong communities then make up strong societies, right? Strong cities, strong towns. And then strong society then starts to change things at a macro level, right? So you got this micro, macro, as above, so below type thing happening. And if you're able to kind of do that on a personal level, you start affecting the people in your lives. You start watching people, almost like inviting them into their own authenticity as well. If you're fucking showing up with presence and with acceptance and with curiosity and expression, watch other people around you go either one or two ways. Go, oh fuck, that's too much for me, I can't handle that, and step away. Or go, whoa, look at this guy fucking showing up. You know, let me, you know, I want to do that as well. Like I want to be called in to do that. I want to be invited in to do that as well. And you bring that out of people. This is what I call sexual leadership, right? When I work with guys, is being like fully in ownership of your sexuality, like fully understanding it, having this robust understanding of yourself, invites your partner in, right? And if you are struggling to connect intimately with your partner, start connecting intimately with yourself and watch your partner be invited into that space as well. And this is like leadership from a horizontal level, not a vertical kind of hierarchical level. You're kind of leading by example here is kind of the way I frame it. Yeah, totally.
Dude, that's so incredible. This has been the best chat. I've got one more question to wrap up what's been such an epic conversation, dude. And that question is, if I was to escort some random person into the room with you who you couldn't see whether it was a male or a female, you didn't hear their voice, but essentially they're offering you $1 million in exchange for your biggest piece of advice, biggest tool, like most beneficial practice, whatever you would consider to be most powerful. And they say, I want to learn about sexuality and liberate myself sexually. And I'm going to give you $1 million to place value on what you consider to be most valuable objectively, without knowing that person's specific situation. What would you say is the most powerful thing in sexuality?
This is an intense question, man. Thank you for putting me on the spot. I like it.
So good.
There's a set of principles that I would share, right? So I share 6 principles in the work that I do, and they all kind of build on one another. And so the principles start with like acknowledgement. So acknowledging your acknowledging your feelings, acknowledging that you have feelings, acknowledging that you have a body that has sensations, acknowledging that there are things that you probably, you know, not gonna like. There's probably some things that you are gonna really like, right? So once you've acknowledged those things, you've got to accept them, right? So it's all well and good to say, yeah, they're there, But then there's that second part, which is to be like, oh, okay, well, this is me. I accept that I have these things, right? I acknowledge that they popped up, and now I've got to like, almost like a gratitude piece. Is like, cool, I'm here with these things. I know that I've got them. I know that I feel this way. Yeah, that's what I'm going to have to accept. And almost like that piece of gratitude of being like, thank God I can feel these things. I'm a human being, right? I have the capacity to feel this. I know there's some people that maybe don't have this, or whatever it might be. So from that acknowledgement and acceptance piece, then comes to this idea of like curiosity, right? So it's like, I can feel these things. Is there other things that I can feel, right? Is there other things that are out there that I can experience? Is there other things that are out there that my partner might be able to experience, right? Firstly, that curiosity comes for yourself, and that curiosity goes to someone else. It's like, okay, well, now that I can kind of accept that these are here, are there other things that I could accept as well? Are there other things that I could acknowledge? Where do they come from? What are they? From that curiosity then comes this idea of, I guess it's like creativity, right? So it's like creativity to like, okay, cool. If I'm curious about some things that are out there and some things that I could also experience, then how do I do that? Where does that kind of take me? What can I do to experience those things? And this is where that creativity piece comes in to kind of figure that out, to be like, oh, maybe I could do this, or maybe I could try that, or maybe I could do this instead, or I could experiment with that piece, or I could talk to my partner about that instead. It's like this curiosity to be like, oh, well, okay, there's maybe something out there that I could explore. And so from that curiosity piece comes what I kind of like call spontaneity, right? Spontaneity is kind of tied into this idea of like being flexible. Because it's all well and good to be creative. You can create kind of one idea, right? But if that idea didn't really work, do you have the flexibility or like the spontaneity to be like, okay, cool, that didn't work, let's try this instead? Where's your, can you roll with the punches and be like, all right, sweet, that didn't actually have the outcome that I wanted to do it. I've got the flexibility to kind of go over here instead. Can we try this? Can we switch to something else and kind of go, oh, cool, I accepted that didn't work. I acknowledge the things that did pop up. What about over here if I just kind of switch gears and change and go over there? And that's pretty much it. Did I get to 6 there? I didn't even...
You got one more. So spontaneity,
spontaneity, flexibility. And then the last piece is to create a full circle is gratitude, right? So the gratitude and the acknowledgement goes back into, so like the 6 principles kind of create a bit of a circle. So
beautiful, man.
And so you start the process again, essentially.
Amazing. This guy or girl is going to get a lot for their $1 million. The circle of liberated sexuality.
Yeah. It's just a simple framework, man, that can be applied to obviously sexuality, the context we've been talking about, but it can be applied to any area of your life, essentially.
Yeah, it's really cool because the 6, just to repeat them: acknowledgement, acceptance, curiosity, creativity, spontaneity, gratitude. I think most people go for like straight to spontaneity, like they assume that the creativity and spontaneity should be where it starts, but they haven't acknowledged their desires or accepted them, and then a lot of people shut off from their curiosity, and then also lack the gratitude piece. So it's like, from my experience and what I've seen, including myself, I'm like putting a lot of expectation on the creativity and the spontaneity, but without doing the baseline work, and then without being grateful for the whole process.
Totally, man. And I feel like people also outsource their creativity and spontaneity to other people, right? They're like, I'll just get a coach. They'll just tell me what to do, right? Or I'll just read this book.
Even.
Yeah.
Just get a sex coach and they'll tell me what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, I can tell you what to do, right? As a coach, if you came and spoke with me, I could give you exercises specifically to do that I know would, start to change things for you. But if you're not cultivating those, that acknowledgement, that acceptance, that curiosity in yourself, then you're only going to get so far. Once our work is finished together, you're not going to continue doing this stuff because you've run out of the things, the creativity you've outsourced to me, the exercises that I've given you. You don't have any yourself, right? Because you haven't fostered that curiosity. So I think
leadership as well.
Totally. I think as like coaches and as people that work in this space, we're doing a disservice to our clients if they have to keep on coming back to us, right?
Yeah.
I, as a coach, my kind of philosophy is to work myself out of a job, right? If you need to keep on coming back to me because you can't continue the process by yourself because you haven't built the tool belt to kind of do that, then I'm creating that becomes a dependent relationship, right? You're dependent upon me in order to keep progressing. So my job is to foster that acknowledgement, acceptance, curiosity, gratitude, and that spontaneity, creativity piece for you to go forward and do that yourself so that you don't necessarily need me anymore.
I love that, man. Super integral. Man, thank you so much for coming on today. I've had an absolute blast and you've shared so much depth of wisdom here. And I love the way that you articulate things and the degree of embodiment that you have across so many areas of personal and spiritual development and how that all weaves into sexuality. Super incredible. And I really want to honor you, man, for being such a caring, mature, grounded leader. I really feel like the world, but the sexuality space is so much more rich and healthy having you in it, and at such a young age. It's really impressive, man. So thanks for coming on. Where can people find you, brother? Where would you like to direct people off the back end of this? Because I know people would love to at least follow you and jump on your Insta, and if you've got resources, it'd be awesome for people to have somewhere to go.
Cool, man. So the first thing I want to say is, man, thank you so much for your kind words and for inviting me on as well to have these conversations. Yeah, it's really something I'm passionate about, and I appreciate you honoring that passion. It feels really nice to be seen. If people are interested in like finding out more about my work or just like finding more about sexuality and masculinity in general, I usually direct them to my Instagram page. That's at the Cam Fraser, and I say to people, if you go there, you'll learn something new, right? I try and keep my posts as educational as possible, and I talk about a whole range of different topics that relate to masculinity and sexuality. So if you just click on any random post, you'll probably learn something new. That's kind of my pitch to people to come and check me out on Instagram. But also,
that's why I wanted to get you on here, because I followed you first from I don't know who or how, but mutual friend. Maybe it was Tim. It was probably Tim. Yeah. So Tim Morrison. That's who it was. And all of your posts are super epic. Like all of them, you put a lot of effort in. You're not just doing it for the sake of slapping something up there to keep the newsfeed busy. I can tell there's a lot of thought and rigor that goes into each one of your posts. Super
Thanks,
informative.
man. Yeah, I appreciate that because I do try and do a bit of research before I do a post, and it's not just for the sake of it.
For shits and gigs.
For shits and gigs, that's it, man. Yeah. I've got a podcast if people are keen to like have a listen to like men and women and people of color and intersex people and trans people talk about models of masculinity and sexuality and kind of how they interrelate with one another. That's called the Men, Sex and Pleasure podcast. I guess all of that as well can be found on my website, which is cam-fraser.com. That's where all my links and resources and stuff are.
Awesome, dude. And I highly recommend that people go over and follow you on Instagram at the Cam Fraser, and then send you a message. I know for me, when I attend a podcast, it's so lovely to hear if anyone, what were the standout pieces that people could relate to, and also any follow-up questions as well, whether you create content from it in further posts or can hit it up in the DMs. But I know that's super helpful. And I really, really appreciate people taking the time to reach out. So go send Cam a message as well.
Yeah, totally. I welcome it.
Awesome. Dude, thanks again for coming on. Have an awesome day. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
For sure, my brother. Yeah, thank you very much. And have a beautiful day as well, mate.